All right, welcome to another episode of Inspire People, Impact Lives. Today we have Dr. Nestor Rodriguez joining us. We're going to talk about staying calm, cool, and collected. But first, let me introduce Nestor, good friend. He is a board-certified emergency medicine physician and the medical director at Carbon World Health. After a successful academic career, Dr. Rodriguez elected to go into private practice. He has a unique blend of intellect, personality, hard work, and perseverance. I do find it fun to introduce a good friend like that in the bio and talk about intellect, hard work, and perseverance. I absolutely agree with those things, but it's just fun to read off a piece of paper to introduce a friend and see, man, you're not that smart sometimes.
Hey, thanks for having me, Josh. I appreciate the opportunity on here. And I would like to say, yeah, those are all true, and probably should add a couple more, but we'll let it slide for now.
Appreciate that. So today we're going to talk about staying calm, cool, and collected. But I want to first, your story is so unique. I want to talk about a little bit from where you came from to where you are today and give us a synopsis on how that's formed the person and successful business owner that you are today.
And sure, and the topic is interesting because of the background, I would say. So I was originally born in El Salvador in 1980, not to give my age away, but if people recall, it was kind of a civil war during that time. Interestingly enough, during the 80s, that's when the U.S. was getting involved because they were trying to prevent communism from spreading from Central America. And I think that's why El Salvador and the U.S. have an interesting relationship. During that time, I grew up with my grandparents because my mom actually left as a refugee when I was, I think, 2 months old. And my grandfather's at that time, he was a big businessman. Honestly, he was on top of the world at that time. He owned a club soccer team. He was president of the national soccer team. And he owned like the equivalent of what Macy's was here, there. But during the Civil War and with all the communism, everything started coming apart. And when I was 7, it was getting around the same time. If anyone's seen Innocent Voices, where in El Salvador, you had to pick sides as a teenager. So you would either recruited by the military government to go to war on their behalf or be kind of guerrilla warriors. So my mom at that time knew the situation. She had moved to South Central LA where she was a 24/7 housekeeper and nanny and started taking me actually. She's like, no, I got to get you out of that space. So when I was between the ages of 5 and 7, I think I came to the U.S. on a kind of student visa, I guess, at that time because I was little, and to meet my mom. And that was crazy because I had no idea who this lady was. And, when you're a baby, neither here or there, you're not mad at anybody there. My dad was never in the picture, and we'll talk about that in a second. But when it took several trips before I was like, all right, who's this lady? And I'll stick with her. So kind of left that from like, hey, I was living a nice life to it was coming apart, to what I thought was a better place because everyone says, hey, come to America, it's sweet. But I went from one civil war to a whole different civil war that I wasn't expecting. So didn't speak a lick of English. Went to South Central LA, and it's always seen in movies and people ask, is it like that? And yeah, it was like that, especially in the 80s, because at that time, as minority, being Latino, we didn't get along with African Americans. African Americans didn't get along with Latinos. And we both, in turn, didn't like Caucasian folks. And usually when I give talks or lectures, people get mad or like hesitant, like, what, did he just say that? Yeah, I did just say that because that was the truth. And during that time, the police officers, remember, it was kind of that period of time with tensions of like racism and things like that to the Rodney King riots, and that changed it. So for me, hey, I had a house with a pool with my grandpa, and like my grandpa gave me everything I wanted, to now it's it's a studio apartment, and I'm living with, I think it was 6 adults. It was my mom, my uncle, and then 4 of their friends that were all kind of housekeepers here. And then going to school was interesting. Again, didn't speak English. My mom put me in public school, and I think the first English words, as in people that go to Spanish countries, were all bad words. I think within the first month, even in grade school at that time, I was getting in fights, and gangs were pretty populated around that time. 1980s, if people have heard of MS-13, which unfortunately we are infamous from El Salvador for, it actually grew 2 blocks from where I lived. That's where it started. And so it was a lot of recruitment, even within the Latino community. Us being El Salvador, we're the minority of the Latino population immigrating here. And so kind of to protect your own that's there. And so my mom being away, she's at work doing what she needs to do, have all this free time. It was sink or swim kind of deal. And I was placed through, after the first 2 months of all that, and I think suspended once or twice, my mom said, hey, no, I'll work extra hours, but I need you in a private Catholic school. And so I did go to that, and that probably was the first thing that kind of saved my life, because it was stricter. I remember the nuns were like, put soap in your mouth if you curse. They did hit you with rulers. I know it's not PC now, but they did do that back in the day. And started seeing like education and sports as one of those things to advance and to do. Even then, though, I was still drawn to the street life, the cool life. But ironically, I don't know, again, given my age, Doogie Howser, remember that show? Yeah. And so everyone used to call me Doogie because for some reason I wanted to be a doctor when I was little. So when my friends who were in gangs were going to go do stuff that, I don't even know if I can speak of, they were like, hey, Doogie, you got to go home. It pissed me off because that was, I thought, the cool part of it. Yeah. But they were taking care of me while my mom was away from work. So kind of started then. Went through the ESL program, which, funny, like a lot of kids get picked on because that's a quote-unquote stupid kids growing up. I got to play video games and learn English, so for me it was sweet. I thought it was like, hey, 2 hours I could go to learn English and play video games. So I never took it that way. It's probably because I didn't understand them making fun of me at first till later, but I went with it. And then my 8th grade teacher at that school, actually, he's like an angel sent from God or something, but he basically would recruit kids from 6th grade who he saw talent in, and he would stay after school till like 10 p.m. Didn't have to pay him, didn't have to do anything. He would coach you in sports, or he would tutor you. So in 6th grade, that's when he started thinking like education more than soccer. I was a soccer player, as you know, a lot of kids want to be athletes and things like that. And my mom to that point was like, you can play soccer as long as you keep your grades up, which I did, other than conduct. Conduct, I always had an F or D because I talked too much, apparently. So I got my act together. So then 8th grade teacher, he was like grades. As a 6th grader, I was taking 8th grade math and science. And he really kind of opened up the education side to me. He would stay there to protect us. I didn't think it was dangerous during the streets. But then he made me think to attend Loyola High School, which was a high school that a lot of the rich kids, and that's how we knew it for, all these rich kids that weren't from the neighborhood would come in. And ironically, they started school after every other high school around, and they ended before. So I got there, I didn't know why, and it was to protect the kids from the environment that they were in. So it kind of made sense that's there. But him, along with my mom's kind of motivation, pushed me there. And the funny part, growing up too, you talk about staying cool and calm, collected. During that same time, all like racism, the fighting within races, the hey, you don't speak English, and now you throw the riots into it, where I was off of school for 4 months during that period for the Rodney Kings because they burned everything. And it wasn't until later that I realized we burned our own community because, we didn't affect anyone we thought we were affected, and we just affected our own people, so to speak. And I knew I wanted something more out of that. So went to Loyola. At that place, it's one of the top schools in the country, one of the top one in California for sure. The strong sports, strong academics, and I struggled at first, but it was that motivation of like, I can do it. Once you're in, that's what they preach. You're in here now. If you need tutoring, you go get tutoring. If you're upset, you go talk to people. So they started kind of drilling this, what does it take to be a leader? And a lot of it is asking help when you need to, and then realizing what your limits are so that you can keep growing, or what your weaknesses are, but turn them into positives. They don't always have to be your strong suits, but just don't make them weaknesses. Just make them like mediocre, so to speak.
Yeah, I don't want to sidetrack us too much, but at one point you had told me your mom was a housekeeper or nanny for a really famous athlete.
Yeah, so yeah, she was. So she was a housekeeper for Bo Jackson, actually. And that could have been a turning point in my life, actually, because she did so for 6 years. And I remember when Bo Jackson he was running down the field. I think it was against the Bengals, and then his hip tore into pieces. He stuck to baseball, so he wanted to move us to Kansas City with him when he left. And my mom at that point had gotten into that high school, and she's like, I can't go. To this day, I was wondering what my life would have been, because the last year we had a fat contract with Nike, and he had all those. I was Nike'd out. So you would have thought I was like one of the best athletes ever. And it was because Bo Jackson gave me everything.
Well, it was one of the most famous marketing campaigns Nike's ever done. Bo knows.
Exactly.
Anyone our age or growing up around that time frame, those were all the commercials, and this was before Michael Jordan took over Nike.
Right, and at that time he had his kids were little. I mean, they were infants, so it was I think he was happy that he could share with someone that's a little bit older and give. And I remember it's like Nike after Nike after Nike. Now, growing up in my neighborhood, trying to keep that stuff on, because all of a sudden you have this inner city kid working with all this Nike stuff that I couldn't afford. That's a whole different story, but we survived. So from that, it took me, education was my thing. And we did an East Coast college tour trip that one of my mom's employers paid for me after I got my citizenship, which is a funny story. As a sophomore, that's when I became a citizen of the U.S., and I thought that test was tough. People think it's an easy test, but I guarantee to say 80% of America don't know the original 13 colonies, and you had to say them out loud and all these questions. But my award was to go to the East Coast and tour all these colleges from her employer, and I fell in love with Yale. Had never heard of it. It's a castles, and then I started looking at it, and for me, my friends in the inner city were like, why are you leaving? Hey, they knew that was like a WASP type institution. With my mom and I, we sat down, we're like, that's crazy. Like, if you have an opportunity to go to the top institutions, whether you're scared or not, you go, and don't deprive yourself, because what you think at that time, you don't know half the things that you need to know in life. So I went. That was the first trip I ever took. Thank God Macintosh at that time was huge and had those big boxes. So this is probably one of the stories my mom tells all the time. I went, and when I checked in to the airport, they're like, hey, this isn't luggage, this is cargo, because I had all my stuff in a box. And I'm like, now what do I do? So I had to pay extra to send it by cargo, get to Yale, and everyone had people moving them. Everyone had like drivers, and I'm sitting here with this Macintosh box that's now ripping, and my roommates are like, where are your movers?
So you're talking about the Macintosh, the big box.
The huge box.
I think it had like a colored front. Like it could have been turquoise, could have been different color, with the big, like the tube TVs type.
Exactly, yeah. So you can imagine trying to check that in. Yeah, now I understand that's cargo. But at that time I didn't, and that's what I took and went off. And those were for the best years of my life. I think Yale did a good job of saying, again, kind of what I learned in high school when my mom would said was, you can change your situation at any point. You just got to believe in yourself, and then surround yourself around people that care for you legitimately, and be able to be vulnerable and then push forward. So that took me to, what brought me to Madison. I walked onto the soccer team, and at Yale, I had no idea where Wisconsin was, to be honest with you. No offense to my people here. I've been here several years now, so I love it, but no idea.
So how'd you choose that? I don't think we've ever spoken of that. As you go from an Ivy League school, pre-med, and playing soccer, and now you're going to choose a med school in the random Midwest. And
it's interesting, because the first move my mom, I'd say she speaks French, because it's not like Spanglish. It's a combination of all kind of words, but she has that ghetto swag, I would say. It's pretty interesting when she talks, but I love it. When I went to Yale, people were like, I remember the first Christmas when I came back, my friends are like, man, they let you out. And I'm like, what do you mean they let me out? They're like, your mom said you were locked up for 4 years. I'm like, what are you talking about locked up? She couldn't pronounce Yale how it is, so they thought I was in jail for 4 years. So I started sending my mom sweatshirts for it. So now you can imagine, now I'm like, it was between UCLA, Harvard, and Madison for medical school that I had an opportunity to go. And I waited to the last, literally it was the last hour. I was in El Salvador visiting family when I made that decision. I decided Madison, I kind of drank the Kool-Aid, so to speak. They brought me out here. They wanted to recruit other kids from outside of the state, and they brought me, wine and dined me. But ultimately, they gave me a full ride, and I was like, hey, you don't leave money on the table, so to speak. So I went with it.
It wasn't the rivalry between Harvard and Yale?
No. Yeah, in fact, it was funny because they always say go to Yale for undergrad, go to Harvard for grad school, because Yale cares about their undergrads, Harvard cares about their grad students. So it would have been like a pedigree of who's who in terms of diplomas. And then even UCLA, I mean, they're top 5 medical school in the U.S. And that was my dream school because I'm an LA kid through and through. So I wanted to go back home and be around my family and people I grew up with. But Wisconsin was it. When I told my mom this, she's like, you already immigrated from a country. Why are you going to another country? That's how bad it was, because we had no idea where Madison was. I'm like, no, it's by Illinois. She's like, what the hell is that? I'm like, oh, it's by Chicago. Oh, okay, I get it. All right, it's in the U.S. You're okay. So stayed here, thought of everything. I wanted to be a neonatologist because my little sister's premature. And then I realized you had to go to pediatric residency and deal with the parents and fevers that are not, you haven't given them Tylenol, so that, yeah, they still have a fever. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. I fell in love with plastic surgery, but then I said, growing up where I grew up, and I wanted to be a doctor, be able to help anyone in any given situation. Am I really going to be doing breast implants for the rest of my life? Is that really my thing? Not that that's all they do, but that was my thought frame. So then I fell in love with emergency medicine because it gave me an avenue to do anything and everything, because you can branch out a lot of things. And emergency medicine had an interesting history at that time. So then stuck around. They were going to do their first residency program here. They recruited me. And again, for me, it's not the name. I always say, like, to some degree, it's the student makes the place, or the employee makes the place, not the place makes the employee. Or that's the motto I went with. So I'm like, all right, if we're going to do this, let's knock it out the park. And that's what we did. I think it's one of the top residencies in the country now. Was chief resident. They kept me on as staff, as assistant program director. Must have done something well. And then climbed the ranks pretty quickly. I went from 0 to 100 the first couple of years and work. So I was in admissions committee, dean's committee searches, leadership. I was one of the youngest kind of leaders within the organization. And that gave me an opportunity to experience a lot of things early on and see how big leaders interact and how they, maneuver through situations, how they interact with people, how do they stay calm and cool, collected. So learned a lot, and I was a hardcore academic person. I knew the private world was a whole different world, but I wanted academics for there because I love to teach. Then during several things happened, and I made the decision to leave academia and then go into the private world. And for sure, I had to stay cool and calm, collected at that point because everything I knew was completely different. Partnered up with my business partner, Ashley Greer, and created Carbon World Health, which is now kind of one-stop shop, fitness, health, and beauty. And now that's the new challenge, is how do we make that as good as everything I've been part of in the past?
So perfect segue in that then. I want to talk a little bit about how you stay cool, calm, and collected, and why it's so important in the emergency room. And then as a business owner, when you're not dealing with life or death, how that has translated. So I can't think of a spot that is necessary to stay cool, calm, and collected more than the emergency room, especially the doctors and nurses that are there, because it's got to be utter chaos. I can only imagine. I've been there a couple times. One was an unfortunate accident. My friend did pull through, but I remember being there and just utter chaos as the med flight comes in. It's a touch and go scenario with 2 different individuals. And talk a little bit about that and why it's so important there. I think we can all tell a little bit why, but really how that translates into other people around you.
Right, and it is. So I tell people when they ask me what's emergency medicine, it's organized chaos. And so one of the interesting parts in medicine that I think we do well is that the career is long before you're let by yourself. And the reason you do that is because you have to learn all those techniques on how to do it. One, we all have biases. So we all have triggers that, whether we like to admit them or not, we have to recognize. And that was one of the things I talked a lot about in academia was you could think they're right or wrong, whatever in my case, your upbringing caused you that. And you have to say, and you have to admit to them, and then how to find ways on how to deal with that. So in the emergency department, with emergency medicine, that's actually one of the main reasons when students are asking me, should I go in or not? I'm like, how do you deal with stress? If you can't deal with stress, and you're going to kill yourself going into emergency medicine. If you're okay with going with the flow, all hell might break loose one day. A patient might die on you and you have to walk in and save someone else. And if you can do that, then emergency medicine is a place for you. But with medicine, you get put in these hierarchy situations, get put in these situations slowly and slowly, so you start building that. But even, the good emergency medicine doctors, I would say, take it to the next step. So for me, you have to stay calm because, one, you're the highest one there. You're carrying the MD. It's not just massive debt, it's also medical director. So you got, they're all looking at you. So in your brain, there's many a times where I'm like, man, what's going on? Why isn't this working? Rethinking, thinking all these tools. But you got to go back to like, hey, one, you have the foundation, you need it, right? That's why this career is so long. And you freaking out doesn't help anyone else in that situation that's there. So you have to keep calm. The other thing I always tell people in the emergency department is no one's happy to see us. And that's one thing that I can't tell you the last time I got thanked in the emergency department.
Really?
By a patient.
I would think that would be like, you just save someone's life, the family members are there, or, whether it's a baby, whether it's an adult, whatever it may be. I think, like, of all places, that might be a place where a doctor might get thanked.
Because you think of they're having their worst day of their life, right? So they're not thinking about you. They're thinking about whatever they're going through that's there. And as a doctor, you're coming in and out. Nurses spend more time with you. And so if you're going to thank someone, it's the last person you see rather than that. And often not, medicine is medicine. I can't avoid the pain. I can't get you back to where you were before in a second. So a lot of times it's just chaotic, but that's where emotions truly come out. And I use it as teaching to nurses and to students or to residents where I'm like, they yelled at you, they called you a name, they did all these things, but that's probably not what they mean. That's just how they interact or how they deal with stressful situations. I've had times where they'll come back and say, hey, I'm sorry, I acted that way. And I think for me, that helps me in all aspects of life because I recognize, hey, we're not perfect and we all mess up. But in society, you can spread a rumor and people would believe it. If someone's doing something good, it takes 30 people to tell you that before you start believing it, unfortunately. So how do you get through with that? So in medicine, I could do it, and it was great, and that's what I taught. And so I thought I was an expert in dealing with that. I recognized what biases I had. I recognized that other people had different biases like myself. We had residents that were in shape. And I still remember this conversation. He's like, man, how do you do it? I can't deal with fat people or big people. And I'm here like any other doctor would have said, how dare you as a doctor think that way? But the reality was this person's all about fitness. They cared about the body, and they thought because you're big is why you have all these medical problems, not thinking, well, yeah, but do you know their situation? Do you know how they got there? So I would tell them, hey, before you go in the room, tell yourself, hey, I don't like this. I don't like this situation. Leave it down the door and keep going. And now do what you're paid to do. So in the hospital, for me, honestly, because of the training, it became easy. Outside of the hospital is where I had to implement those own rules that I was teaching or those own lessons to myself, both personally and in the business world.
So that's a really good thought there. I think a lot of people struggle with that as they and even sometimes myself, is I can deal with stress and problems in the workplace where we have guardrails, whereas for the most part, we know what's moral. We know what's right or wrong, especially in like an HR type situation. You have boundaries. Sometimes you don't keep those boundaries when you go home with your spouse or kids, or friends even, for that matter. So how did you learn to maybe mistake that you made, and how'd you learn to adapt what you're adapting at work into your home life?
So and you're right in saying that. So for me, I always say in terms of how to stay calm and cool, collected, you're always learning because you're always learning for people. So the biggest things for me were at home, for example, I know what happens when I'm not cool and calm, collected. So recognizing. So because growing up, I couldn't show emotion. I couldn't let people know that I was hurting or that we didn't eat or that, my mom was struggling. My thing was to retrieve. And I know that.
To retreat?
To retreat. And you're like, don't worry about it. Don't talk to me for 3 days. And that's not the best, right? So it took a huge personal situation that kind of put me into depression to realize, all right, this retreat, normally I can bounce back, but when you get to a dark spot or a situation, you need other people to get you out. And that's for me being vulnerable to say, hey, you need help at that point, and learning that. So a book, Brene Brown, and people have heard her talk about vulnerability. And it's funny because if I would have heard her at the height of my academic career, I would have been like, yeah, whatever, this is for people that are weak. And that's what people think. Versus after I went what I went through, it was like, man, if I would have learned this a long time ago, I could have helped tremendously. So in the home is recognizing, whether you're single, whether you're married, is surrounding yourself with people that you truly trust, and recognizing that those people you might not like what they tell you, but they have your best interest in mind. So recognizing, hey, I'm about to do this. I'm about to push everyone away. How do I stop it, right? Because the same thing in the emergency department. I'm freaked out. I don't know what's going on, but I can't just leave the room. I got to stay in there and fight with the team and work with the team and figure it out. And in the emergency department, I have no problems, even if the janitor's in there, being like, hey, do you have any thoughts? Because in my department, the janitors are always all the time. If they're like, man, I saw this doctor, try this. And if that cures, it's sweet. Let's do it, right? There's no, so why can't I do that in my personal space?
Call those truth tellers.
Right, because you're gonna show that you don't know something, and you're gonna be scared. But those are the people that you should do that with. So I try to surround myself with people that I value their opinions, whether I like it or not. But for me, it's teaching people like, hey, when you're seeing those things are coming out in you, all right, put a stop, because you recognize you have the skill set, and as soon as you get that help, there's no challenge you really can't overcome. But people don't really talk about that, right? All the grind in the business. That honestly, to me, was the hardest thing, because one, I come from medical side where things are, A goes to B, it goes to C, goes to D, and everyone follows suit and everyone does what they're supposed to do. There's a hierarchy. Business, all hell breaks loose. Mm-hmm. Like, you don't know. Yeah, you have a business plan, but what does that really mean, right? That's on paper to get money and funding, but like what actually happens from the employee to the client. And interesting enough, from a medical perspective, where I'm helping people, we take that to heart. Like when we are able to save someone, and we have to internalize and deal with it. In business, the hardest thing for me was take that emotion out. And I had to surround myself around leaders that were like, you're thinking with emotions. And it's true. Right? If you make businesses based on business, it should be black and white. But it's not that, right? You have people, you have people's lives in there. You have all these other things that you have to overcome and go through. So again, it's like, what are the trigger points for me that I know I'm going to act dumb or make a stupid decision that I'm going to regret? Who are the people that I can confide on during those moments? And then how do I constantly overcome and keep remembering myself, hey, you can get over it. The other thing why you have to stay kind of cool, calm, collected is, I think the leaders have the best. If you want to become a leader, you have to do that. You have to listen rather than speak, and you have to be able to sit there in silence and comfort and think it through before you say something. Because, again, similar to hey, they'll believe a rumor over truth. To overcome something negative is going to take you 100 times longer than a positive that the next week that no one's going to remember for you. So you got to constantly kind of keep thinking about that and kind of implementing some of those. So I look at like, what would I do in the emergency department? Because to me, that's why when black, there's no problems with that. But I have to do that in family and work situations is tough.
Yeah, very tough. Because what I've found is everyone follows your energy. Mm-hmm. So if your energy is freaking out, everyone else is going to freak out. And that's obviously not a good scenario for anyone involved. Right.
And not to bring like just the medical aspect of it, but stress does play a huge toll. Now, when we're looking, with Carbon World Health, you can call us like the progressive type medicine, right? So for us, the way I speak to my patients and clients is different than I used to in an academic setting, where I'm the doctor, you're the patient. It might not be the case for everyone, but that's the environment I was in. versus now I'm seeing them like, hey, I have the real same challenges you do, right? How many times have you gone to a doctor's office and they say, eat well, exercise? Well, the question is, do you exercise and eat well to the doctor? You'll be surprised how many don't. Or further yet, if it's that easy, we wouldn't have any of these problems, right? And then the excuse is I don't have time, including myself. But it's like, how do you do that? Because stress plays a psychological role, plays a physiological role in your health. And if you want to be successful for a long time, you better be able to manage that. You didn't make it to the top and then you're going to die 2 years later because stress is killing you. You got to be able to manage that. And I think the good leaders, you see that, where they're like, dang, they're so calm, cool, collected. And you'll talk to them. They're like, oh, I was freaking out in my brain. I didn't know what to do in there. But I didn't show it. Therefore, I wasn't freaked out about it. Right. So, you know, it's unique, especially as an entrepreneur. You always hear that, right? And I always hear podcasts myself. I'm like, yeah, that's just them. Oh, yeah, it's cool you did it. But in fact, you just hearing it and you keep hearing it from people and you keep believing it, it gives you hope that, yeah, it is actually, everyone's going through it. It's just people don't talk about those struggles. And what did they do to keep calm? And it's the same thing. They looked to other people, they knew their triggers, and then use the same lessons you have in whatever you think you're the environment you're most comfortable in, those uncomfortable situations, and things will succeed.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about those biases earlier. I think I told you the story, but I went to see my general physician, and he's like, wow, your body composition's changed quite a bit. Your blood work looks great. And he's saying, but and I described the workouts to him, and he said, but what do you do for cardio? Mm-hmm. And to him, his bias was cardio was long bike rides, long runs, not the high intensity interval training that we do and some of the weights that we do at a high level. It was just interesting to hear that bias come out from him and reflect upon it.
Right. And you think about it, it's a different space, right? We're taught the medical part of it. And now we're in medicine, we're at a point where we treat diseases. And, you know, now it's preventative because a lot of these diseases that we didn't have before are even younger and younger, and people are thinking about it differently. And it's our mentality and how things are changing. The problems have existed, but it's how we deal with it. Now everyone's like, we don't have time. It's go, 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 go. And it's how do you deal with it right now with social media? That's where, you know, keeping calm, cool, collected adds another dilemma that I wasn't used to. So at the hospital, I remember I still remember this with my chair at that time. She's like, you got to delete your Facebook. I'm like, why? She's like, well, you're a doctor, you represent UW, and you can't do that. And I was a resident at this time, and I'm like, I'm not going to do that. My family's not here. Everyone's in El Salvador. That's my only way. Now, what I forget is I'm still a doctor, whether I'm with you in some remote island getting crazy or here to people's, or in the hospital, right, and in people's opinions. Is it fair? No. But did I choose it? Yeah, I chose to be a doctor, and I have to abide by it. And so I understood that. Now, as a business owner, social media, and it was easy to shut off because it's like, all right, whatever, okay, I won't show pictures of me being crazy, fine. As a business owner, where you're trying to market yourself, you're trying to promote your business, you see every picture. And I don't know if Facebook does this, but it throws your competitors in your face every single day. And those pictures make it seem like they're killing it or they're the greatest. And you're constantly reminded like, oh, you didn't go to that meeting? They probably did. Oh, you didn't get that client? They probably did. And then you recognize, you're like, no, I know these businesses, I know competitors, and it's not, they're having the same struggle as we are. But social media paints this picture because no one's putting, well, some people do, but the majority of people on social media, it's a happy life. Like no one has problems, right? So you start making your own problems bigger than what they are. And I think that's one of the things of staying cool, calm, collective. Like there hasn't been a problem that people haven't dealt with. It's just maybe not people that you know. And It's how do you figure that out? How do you trust to go talk to other people? For me, it was go to people in other industries. Because the problems are the same, whether yours in finance or me in the medical or fitness, the core of how you react are the same. But then I don't feel threatened in that, hey, you're going to take my fitness idea, or hey, you're going to think we suck. Because that has nothing to do with it for it. And so, or because you're your own business, you're so passionate about it that you're afraid somehow people are going to be like, yeah, his idea is not that good, or he's not that passionate. And that, at least for me personally, that's always like what am I talking about? No, I believe it. The day where I'm like, oh, we failed or we didn't do this, then you start seeing on social media, you're like, damn, they did. You start creating these scenarios in your head that don't exist, and you need someone else to get you out of those. And that's where you're kind of surrounding yourself, or even truthfully telling you, like, this is just in my head. And one of the biggest things I looked at that I learned recently, actually, and I got it from a podcast from Tony Robbins, was like, he calls it, I think it's 15 seconds of talk shit is what I think he called, part of my language. But he's like, if you have a problem, all right, spend 15 minutes, go do whatever you need to do. Call yourself, you suck, you sorry, bang your head on the, do whatever you do, and then move on and go deal with something else. So I try to practice that. But again, it's hard, but you got to keep practicing these lessons you learn so that you can do it. Otherwise, you're going to forget.
And I had a business coach who was a neuroscientist in the past, and you could, because this is your area, not mine, but I think I'm remembering correctly that the small piece of your brain, the amygdala, which is kind of our negativity, our fight or flight part of our brain, is a magnified negativity by like 200%.
Yeah, I don't know the percentage, but it does. And in same way that when you talk about stress, your cortisol levels go through the roof. So people now, with more stressful, more things, like even what people don't think is stress. And so one of the big things that, and you've seen me around, that I preach and I tell people, hey, I'm not the best at this, but I'm trying to get is sleep. And so as a doc, I chose a career. So the doctors that complain about their life, I'll say it publicly, I don't feel sorry for them. We get in our fancy cars and we go home. We get in our fancy houses. So like, yeah, we got debt, but we're okay. Then sleep is a situation of like, how do you shut down and what do you do? Because stress, and if you haven't slept, that's a bad combination. Now you throw medications, now you throw medical problems, you throw family issues. It's just a recipe for disaster. So one is taking care of yourself first with healthy eating, with working out, and with sleeping well to decrease all those hormonal or physiological responses that we don't know. Like, honestly, even doctors that we've studied this, if it's not in our field, in emergency medicine, we thought about it in like flight or flight, right? Trauma, like just how you mentioned it. At carbon health, I think about it, okay, what are the long terms? Why can't you sleep? Why are you having marital problems? Why are you having sexual dysfunction problems? Why aren't you working out, right? And that's why I call it progressive, because as a doc, they don't teach you that. You're supposed to think, here's a problem, here's a solution, figure it out, go after it. Versus now thinking in general, how do you do that? And you have to think at every aspect of it. Do I get 8 hours of sleep? No. And when I do go to sleep, are the business problems in my head? Yes. So I got to figure out, how do I get out of that? And for me, it's reading a book that has nothing to do with anything. Just something cool, whatever, just to read. And even I first started doing that, and it was self-help books or business books. There's no way you're going to put me to sleep after I read about a business book, because all I'm going to do is apply those principles to look at my business. So now it's just random stuff in terms of doing it. But you do need that sleep to kind of keep surviving and doing that stuff. And a lot of people don't sleep at all or don't sleep well.
So what are some of your tricks besides reading a book that would help someone go to sleep that's outside of the medicine fix? So
for sleep, there's pharmaceuticals are out there, right? They push their medications, and I think medications are good in certain situations where you really have reached a point. There is a point, I believe, medically, where if you haven't slept, you need intervention medically to get you into a sleeping pattern. So I could bring personally, that example. When I was going through depression, I think I went 4 days without sleep, like literally not sleeping, and I didn't care, and I was like, fine, I'm gonna live. And it was people looking at me like, oh my God, you look crazy. And I compare my pictures during that time and what I look like now. Yeah, it's a whole different world of tire. At that point, yeah, you do need medications and you need professional help. In the average case, it's shutting all these things of stress, like our phones, right? There's studies of like just the buzzing. Do you really, right now I have this ESPN app that like, I think I should break my phone because of it, because every little news, bzz, bzz. And whether I pick up my phone or I don't, that buzz has distracted me, has caused stress. And why did it cause stress? Just because who's on my phone, right? So what we tell people at Carbon is all distractions, and those distractions can vary. For me, light doesn't bother me. For Ashley, for example, any little light bothers her. And we always get an argument at night where she's like, that light of the switch that's in the kitchen is I'm like, I don't know what to do. So what we got her is now those sleeping shades or masks that are there. And, you know, I got her 4 or 5 of them now. She wears them on there. And then she's comfortable. The other thing is the temperature-wise. Usually, you know, scientifically they studied, or medically, if it's a colder environment, you're going to sleep better. And I think that has to do with the comfort of your snuggling under sheets and stuff like that. So that has nothing to do, even the lonely person that doesn't have anyone around, hey, take comfort in the sheets and sleep there. Making sure it's dark, making sure those lights, and then just becoming a routine before you go to bed, because your brain is wired. I do late shifts, and when I get home, yeah, I'm tired, but my brain hasn't shut down. So what do I have to do? Whether it's, hey, I'm going to wash my face, I'm going to brush my teeth, I'm going to shower. These routines get your brain into thinking, okay, I'm going to do it. It's no different than when we work out, right? When you're warming up, why do you warm up? Well, it's for muscles, but it's also you're mentally preparing to do whatever you're going to do. When you go in a meeting, when you're reviewing things, you're mentally preparing. When you go see a client. So we do all that preparing and all that repetitive routine things for everything other than ourselves and our health and stress.
So you're saying to do things with intention.
Exactly. Exactly. And you got to think about it. The hardest part is thinking about it. The plan comes easy. It's just now what's that intention, and what's that intention for you? So what might work for me is not going to work for you, or vice versa, right? What I do before a stressful situation, or what I do when I get called names, or what I do when someone says, hey, he's not that great of a doctor. You know, Ashley tells me, so wave it off. Who cares? They don't even know you. Me, I'm like, I spent 15 years of my life. I have all the awards that I could have and all the degrees, and you're going to say I'm not good. I take it personal.
Yeah.
Right. And then it's like, how do you deal with that? And the reality has come is like, hey, there's always going to be someone that's going to be talking bad in that, but like they don't know you. So you don't know if they meant to do that because they're having a bad day. So who cares? Don't worry about that. Figure out what's going to work for you and ask people, how does that work? So for me, it's my mentors being as a doc, because honestly, that was one of the things that to this day bugs me. And so my mentors in the medical field, they're like, all right, let it bug you, and then say, are they a doctor? Do they understand your life? No. All right, move it on. Right. And just by saying that, I'm like, yeah, cool. Like for some reason, psychologically, mentally, everything calms down and you move forward from it.
That's really good. You think about this. So being president of the United States could be seen as one of the highest positions in the world, if in maybe some people's eyes, the highest position in the world. And you think about that under President Obama, about 50% of the country hated his guts, and 50% loved him. Right. And you look at under President Trump, it's about the same. And so, I don't know, maybe we need a few more people to hate us or think we're not good, because obviously they've done some things right to get to that level of politics anyhow.
Right.
But you're always going to have those haters.
And that's what I was saying with the, you know, if you look at if you're able to keep emotions out or stress down, decisions can be made a little bit easier. And I think you don't get that to your higher up in leadership, because those leadership, they've made those tough moves already. So that emotional side is almost detached. The presidency offers an interesting thing, because you're right. I mean, not to talk politics or anything, but like Donald Trump, he recently, they'd say, hey, when I went into it, I thought I would run this country as a business. And he admitted, he's like, that'd be easy. Because honestly, you take the emotion out of everything, then that's fine. But that's not how you do things. And emotions, people are there, right? So then it starts complicating things. And then you're put in situations. It's not an easy, hey, I like it or I don't like it. So it's a little more complex than that. And now you take it to your own life. Honestly, I don't care what Trump's doing right now when I'm in my situation and my problem. So you got to take care of yourself, and then you're going to move forward in terms like that. And that's a dilemma in itself, because I want to help people. I want to do things. But if I'm not in a state to help people, I can't. So I got to apply those same principles in whatever situation I'm in.
So I think that's really good. I could imagine someone that's listening say, but how do you mean? What do you mean you don't care? You're an immigrant. You're a business, you're a leader in this community. How could you say that you don't care what Trump is doing? And how do you separate those two things? To, I guess I could just hear someone saying that, that's listening to this. And what would you say to them?
So I would say, so you got to, again, putting into what context we're talking about. Do I care? Do I want? So my biggest, if you're going to say weakness, is because of the way I grew up. If you need my shirt right now, I'll give it to you. Now, I know people take advantage of that. And so people will ask me, I mean, you know it, and you probably get asked the same thing about, hey, your time, your money. People just think about money, right? I don't have it like that where people are just asking me to donate money. Hopefully one day I will. But now it's time is what people are asking. Hey, can you get your time or your connections? Hey, can I get access to your athletes? Can I get access to your business owners? So you're constantly giving. But you got to look at that situation. What is the thing you're most worried about that moment, and work on that first. And that was hard for me because even in the community here, right, I want to help immigrants. I want to help the kids DACA because, I was in their boat. I want to help Latinos. I just want to help people. But if I'm not in a situation where I'm helping myself or keeping myself sane or alive, then I can't. Why bring those problems into my head? And for me, where I see it is when I'm doing the nonprofit work, because I'm like, God, I want to do all these things, but my patients don't care what I'm doing nonprofit. My patients don't care about my business when I'm at the hospital. So I got to be in at that moment and think about that situation. When things start clicking, if you look at a successful leader, I'll show you people that can delegate, that are organized and can deal with stressful situations. Therefore, they're everywhere because they can go everywhere. If you're not to that point, don't worry about that. Like in my head, I've solidified being like, hey, at the end, when I die, hopefully I have a legacy that I helped, that I did protest, that I did all that. But this is not the time. This is not what I want to do right now. And to be honest, as an entrepreneur, that I used to think it was just like a underrepresented minority thing or people that were broke, because it's only a way up, right? At Yale, we always used to joke around like, where would I be if I had all the money in the world? Would I have the same drive or not? I don't know, honestly. It'd probably depend on who I was around and what people. Because at Yale, we have people that, trust fund kids, right? They made it. They have all this stuff. Versus, and the biggest conversation first year, my roommate, he's from Japan. I'm like, man, you're loaded. His dad was CEO of Goldman Sachs, and they had their own plane. He went to New York to get a haircut. He's paying $200. I'm like, what? I convinced him to get a haircut. I messed it up, and he never, I think he now pays even more money because after the haircut I gave him. But he's like, I don't have money. My parents do. And if I mess up, I have only myself to blame because I have every opportunity in the world. And I was like, man, you're right. Because I didn't have anything. So the only way is up.
That's really good perspective.
Right. So I could only go. But, when you brought the hater thing, that was my thing. I'm going to prove people wrong. You got to get to a point in terms of your career where it's a fine balance, because proving people wrong, and I mentor young professionals right now where that's all like, I'm the best. Why? Because I know I'm the best. That ain't going to cut it. Mm-mm. I like that drive, and I tell them keep going, but that's not going to cut it. You got to prove that you're the best. Now you have a good combination. So you got to look at, okay, what point in your life are you sitting there like, all right, I'm successful. What can I do? Now I have everything together. All right, now what other things can you give back to? And what are those stresses? You got to deal with that. Because I guarantee you some people do stress about like, I'm not doing enough for the community, because I do. I'm like, I didn't come from that. I should be giving back. I do these. But this is not the time for me to be doing all that. For example, I got to take care of myself to help other people. And then you keep moving forward. If you're at a point where like, man, I don't know where to go, and entrepreneurship it's crazy. No one asks. Think about entrepreneurship, and I would guarantee the majority of people, when you say entrepreneur, they think tech. Tech.
So what's in our face every day?
No offense to tech guys, and I wish I was tech savvy. Those guys go from millionaire for like one day to the next. They can't, right? And everyone says, hey, I failed. And I've listened to these podcasts, and I've been like, yeah, that's easy for you to say because now you're Google. Now the last was the CEO of Skype. He's like, well, I failed and I had this drive, and don't worry to fail. And realistically, I'm this listener that's like, yeah, cool, but you had the minute to do that and you had the knowledge base. I'm nowhere there now. I'm in a different industry that's there. And for me, it's, all right, where am I now? What am I struggling with the most? And what lessons do I have to learn? If I can't deal with stress, there's experts about it. If I can't pay for it, guess what? Just go sit somewhere and see how people interact, and take away what good things you want to take away from them and what bad things you want to take away. And that's what I tell residents for the doctors. I don't tell them become me. I'm like, look at what I do well, and if you can do that, by all means. Look at what I do bad, and if you can do better than me, do it. I don't want to make you into my own mold. But a lot of it is like, okay, we're knowing yourself, and if you don't know that, then I can give you all the lessons. I can give you 1 through 10, but if you don't want to admit where you're at, it's going to be tough to apply those things to.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know we're wrapping up, and I want to make sure we're respectful of your time. So because I know that you work with such high-level athletes, high school, collegiate, professional, in all different sports, what do you do advice-wise to get them to be cool, calm, and collected?
So for them is, one, we teach them, I think they get a lot of like, hey, I got to learn the skill set, right? I got to learn how to play the sport, or I got to succeed. And what I tell them is, once you get to a certain point, you know how to play that sport. I mean, you're learning the playbook, but you're not telling these professional football players, how to play football. You're getting little kinks and stuff like that. The problem that no one ever teaches them, and I even in college, I remember it was starting to come out, the sports psychology section, which is, to people think it's like foo-foo, because I remember the first session I went to, they're like, imagine yourself scoring. Imagine how you feel. I, in reply, said, man, that was great. I took a best nap ever because you calmed me down. But what I tell them is, okay, what are your fears, or what is holding you down? Because you have all the ability in the world, and let's talk about that. So with the athletes, that's what we tell them. It's that fine balance of, I can conquer the world. I know I can do it. That should be like, I have all the abilities, and I'm not going to lose because I lack ability, rather than I got this. I can do this. Then it's being like, all right, what are you scared about, and how do we prevent you from being scared about it? I'm going to lose, so what? You're going to get hit. Okay. You're not going to get that at work. Not this year, but next year you will. And how do you then start working with that? Because you give me an athlete with talent and has that type of drive, I'll tell you, they're the all-stars. They're the people, right? Look at Brady. I always use him as an example to our athletes. I don't know how old he is. 40s, right? Something 40, like that. 41, you see his routine.
It's ridiculous. The TB12 method?
Yeah, like he does what he needs to do. And as an athlete, that's what you need to do. Because everyone has talent. But how many guys do we know had talent and never made it? It's probably because they didn't know how to deal with stress, or a lot of things that get into them that get in trouble.
No,
right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to make sure our listeners know where to find you. What would be the easiest way if a listener had a question?
And so I would say you can kind of go to our website, and it's www.carbonworldhealth. So carbon, C-A-R-B as in boy, O-N, then world, W-O-R-L-D, health, H-E-A-L-T-H.com. Or you could email me at info@carbonworldhealth.com. So if you remember Carbon World Health, you'll find us. You'll be able to Google it. Our Instagram is Carbon World Health. Same with our Twitter. And I would say one of the things to look at, even if you don't email, we have a blog page that we provide a lot of this information. And you can see from the blog page how we're looking at medicine. We're trying to demystify it and actually make it more personal for people. And we recognize the reason we succeed in that space is the same reason we succeed in the emergency department. I meet you where you're at. And that's how you have to meet people. Me telling you, if you haven't ran to go run 10 miles, it's not going to happen. I could tell you that. I could write it in a paper. I can even give you a prescription to do it. It's not going to happen. And so if we meet you where you're at and let's get creative of what we need to do, then we'll succeed together. But they can reach out to any of those.
Perfect. I want to do a little shameless plug because you and Carbon World Health have truly changed my life. Being able to work out, being able to, well, actually, I'll say this. When I first came in, it was to get my ass whooped. I needed a change in my life. But what I found through the health side of things and the advice that you've given has truly changed my life. And over the last 18 months, I've gotten in, this is the best I've felt, the best I've looked since I was in my early 20s. So I can't thank you enough. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. You look like you're in your 20s now. You just got to get some Botox in you, and you'll be looking like you're 18.
Still selling. Still
exactly.
selling. All right. Thanks again.
Thank you.